Very good afternoon, everybody. Delighted to be here alongside two fantastic founders. My name is Remus. I'm going to be hosting a discussion on the theme of being a Black entrepreneur, the journey, the challenges, and the future. We're privileged to have two different founders at different stages of the entrepreneurial journey. So Tom, who started his business 12 years ago and has since exited, and Rich, I think, raised his seed round last year. So the two bookends of the entrepreneur journey. Just a very brief introduction. My name is Remus Brett. I'm a partner with Local Globe, early stage VC. Before that, I was an entrepreneur and I had my own business for 11 years. If I could just ask to get going, maybe Tom and then Rich, if you could just say a few words of introduction to yourselves, and then we'll get going with the questions. So Tom, over to you.
So hi, my name's Tom Edula. As Remus mentioned, I had my own tech startup in the fashion space for 11 years, which I then sold and exited last summer. It was very high-end tech focused. We had our tech team based in Cambridge and the rest of us down in London, and we sold to a Hong Kong-based clothing manufacturer. Since then, I've been focused on positive society and climate-related projects. I sit on 2 climate-related boards. I also co-founded a research organization called Extend Ventures, which is looking at diversifying access to finance for underrepresented founders. And we've got some interesting data that's coming out from that. So stay tuned over the next couple of weeks.
Fantastic. Rich.
Guys, my name is Rich. I'm the CEO and founder of Business Score. We're a service that connects fast-growing e-commerce companies to funding that's fair, fast, and simple. We went through a program called Y Combinator last year in the States. We now have a small team. Before that, I worked as a management consultant for McKinsey here in London.
Fantastic. So again, thanks for joining us. I'd like to spend quite a lot of our conversation on the more personal aspects of becoming an entrepreneur, becoming a founder. So appreciate some personal context and insight before we get going. And I guess the first question that I'd really like to ask, and again, Tom, if I could start with you, is what was it that gave you the confidence initially to take that plunge, quit the day job, and dedicate yourself full time to Metail?
So a bit like Rich, I started life as a management consultant, but a long time ago now, back in 1998. The internet world was booming back then, and I was really quite excited by startups and the sense of building something, growing something, and trying to solve big problems in a disruptive way. But right at that time, I didn't have the guts or the confidence or the courage really to start my own thing. So I ended up joining a startup called Sportal back then. I then went on to actually work for, I think, all told, 5 different startups of different size. I think that the largest one was Hutchison 3G, which became the mobile phone company 3. I think they spent $10 billion before they earned a single penny. But it was only really at the last place I was at, which is a place called Inspired Gaming Group, where I finally gained the confidence, if you like, and courage to do my own thing. So I think previous to Inspired, I'd been a clever guy working for senior management. I was like the strategy guy, the guy pre-vetting stuff. So, the guy that they could rely on with the typical management consultant skills to solve thorny problems. I think it was at the last place that I then was given the chance to earn my way back into the room, if you like, by going off and taking a product opportunity that I'd done the strategy work for and actually build it up and make it happen. So through that process, I ended up managing teams of people. I took a product from concept through to scaled rollout, and I grew the casino division from nothing to 70% of the UK market in 18 months. And that for me, finally, if there was something to finally give me myself confidence, it was like, wow, I just done this. I generated wealth for lots of other people, but not for myself. So now I could go out and do it for myself. And even then, it took a year for me to settle on an idea that I felt confident enough would be big enough, exciting enough, and utilize my skills to the full.
Fantastic. Thanks very much. And Rich, if I could ask you the same question.
Yeah, I think for me, like, I always knew I wanted to go try build stuff. Because I feel like, life's short. You got to try and like I think try and achieve as much as you can, or like try and achieve as much as you can for the world. And that's kind of, I think, really important for me personally. Try to have as big as an impact as you can have. And I think probably the biggest point at which I knew I was ready, I think I wasn't necessarily ready, to be super honest. It was more like come to this point when I was in my consultancy, and after a couple of years, you basically either your salary, three things happen: either your salary doubles, you go to business school, or you go off and try to build your own company. And I knew that if my salary was to double and I get promoted, there's no way I'd be able to gonna give that up and then try and basically go try to build something. So I was like, you know what? If it's not now, it's basically now or never. Whilst I'm still, I can still try and hustle a little bit and, try and, live at home, be super cheap whilst I try to figure things out. And so for me, it was a bit more of, I guess, almost like a push to be like this logical point where it's like, it's kind of now or never is what I felt. And I think also like personal circumstances meant that I also knew that there's a bit of a window for me where it's like I've got probably like 5 years to try and work this thing out. Otherwise, I'll probably just stay in corporate for a bit longer and like just save up and start other priorities in life.
Great, thanks very much. And if I could ask again, starting with you, Tom. So 12 years ago in tech startup time is an incredibly long time. But what I'd love to sort of ask you about is the challenges of being a Black founder. Both of you think back to then and thinking about some of the challenges that you faced that you felt were specific to being a Black tech entrepreneur. And I'd love to compare and contrast that with the way you see the world today. I know you spend a lot of time with other entrepreneurs, and I guess to try and get some perspective on, how much has changed, how much has improved, and how much is still the same, or in some cases, God forbid, even worse than it was back then.
So the thing for me is that I know that I come from a position of privilege. So even as a Black founder, I went to a great school. I got a scholarship to a great school. I went to Cambridge. So I had, I was a management consultant. So I'd already jumped into a whole strata of networks of people who I'd worked really hard for. I'd kept people from every job that I'd worked in and sort of generated my own network of trust and reputation everywhere I went. And I certainly, when I think about life from school days, even through to university days, I always felt like networking was a dirty word. So it was a sense of like, both my parents were immigrants to this country. I'm actually sort of, Nigerian, Norwegian. I had no sort of uncle who could get me work experience anywhere. I had nobody who I could ask about anything, right? So or get that advice in terms of the UK. I had to do it all myself. And I spent a lot of time sort of generating that reputation and doing good things, so that by the time it came to starting my own thing, I had, in the end, people to call on. And when I sort of raised my first friends, family and fools money, it was literally that. So it was like an aunt, an old school friend, an old university friend, an old boss, and a random guy I met at the top of the gherkin. So that was my first bit of money. And I really felt that I had to dive into a group of people who knew me, respected me, trusted me, and that's where I was going to get the money from. So when I went to some of these early events, it was a very nascent period. 12 years ago, there were a few coffee mornings. I think Saul Klein ran one at the top of Waterstones on Piccadilly, and there was very few founders. It was such a sort of, it felt like such a homogeneous group, and it was really difficult to break into the clique. So I felt like I'm not going to have success here. I'm going to go off and have to do my own thing and find people who who respect me for what I've done in the past and will take a punt on me. I think the difference that has sort of come to now, if you like, I think there's now an infrastructure, there's now organizations that can help lots of different types of founders, no matter what your background is. I felt I had to do so much of it myself. I felt like the investor community was really hard to break into, and I had to find different ways to get my money. I raised £25 million over the course of MeTel, none of it from venture. I just networked my way to different pots of money from Hong Kong, from Israel, from different places. Whereas now it certainly feels like it's the beginning of a structure where there are organizations that can help you with being investor ready. There are organizations that can help you, get your pitch decks right and so on. There's the likes of Foundervine, YSYS, but it feels like the environment in terms of supporting potentially Black founders is 10 years behind what it was for general founders, and female founders are somewhere in between. So they're like five years behind. So it's the early stage of a cohort where you can find other people, where you can feel comfortable in the environment, where you can find other like-minded people to progress things. So for example, walking into a room where you want to try and raise money, the relatability, the other side matters. You probably got 20 minutes to make your pitch, make a connection with the other side. To that point of privilege, because I've got to Cambridge, that sort of sense of being able to overcome, I talk the same way, I talk that, I can try and find a relatability factor there, but I did often feel like I had to put my credentials down as quickly as possible so that we could then get into the meat of the conversation. And if you think about other types of founders, if you don't have to do that, you've got longer to pitch your business. So that's a change, and therefore you need greater diversity at all stages in terms of investors, in terms of organizations that are going to help you to enable everybody to have the same initial starting point. And I think that part is improving. But as I mentioned, I'm part of this organization now where we're looking at data over the last 10 years. And the sort of sad fact is that I think there have only been 31 Black founders that have raised venture in the last 10 years. And of that, only one Black female founder, right? So we'll be able to show the trajectory, and we're going to produce a report in the next couple of weeks. But at least that is improving. But the stark reality is that it has been a very hard place to raise money, and well below what you'd expect in terms of proportionality of Black founders in the general population.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Tom. We could go much deeper on that subject, and obviously being on the venture side, it's the numbers which I think are starting to become more exposed, paint a depressing but probably an accurate story of the history. Obviously lots happening. Color in Tech, and what we're doing here is hopefully a small step towards addressing some of those issues. But Rich, I'd love to get your take as well. Obviously you've become a tech entrepreneur at a different time. You were at Y Combinator last year. I know you've built a very strong network of other founders of your age, your generation. Just love to get the way you see the world now based on your experience getting started fundraising. Any observations on the challenges or otherwise of being a Black founder in that community, or do you feel the playing field has been more level since maybe Tom's time 12 years ago?
Yeah, put it this way, I wouldn't have been a Black entrepreneur back when Tom was starting out, and I think we're definitely standing on the shoulders of giants in that sense, and I think people like Tom have definitely opened the way, at least in showing that Black founders you can build stuff. We're smart, we can make stuff happen just like any other founder, but it's still really tough, and I think it comes from like a couple places. I think firstly, like myself, I grew up in Ends, went to a very normal school and everything, but it's like you still need to make sure you go to the LSEs, the Cambridge, the Oxfords, to the top universities, and then make sure you get into the McKinseys or Goldman Sachs. I think today, in order to be taken seriously. And personally, I knew I'm from Ends, so it's like I've got to end up in McKinsey, otherwise that's my chance to be an entrepreneur. And so I think that's still quite problematic, because the challenge is that in order to get to those places, you've always got to be right. I'm sure like Tom will testify, he always had everything to be perfectly right. Whereas being an entrepreneur, things are never right. Things are always like a mess. And I think it can be quite jarring, kind of bringing those two worlds together and just getting comfortable with it. The idea that you're not always going to have the right answer. People are going to quit. You have to fire people. Things aren't going to go right. You're not always going to have the master plan. And I think it's quite hard because today the only way you can really be a Black founder and get funded is you kind of go through all of those levels. But I think it is improving. And I think that, it's definitely somewhat easier now. There's organizations that are rated like Forward Partners that have like a really early stage program for when you've got an idea. Obviously, like Local Globe has done a lot of brilliant work to actually put your money where your mouth is and actually invest in Black founders. But the truth is, I think most of the scene today, especially when it comes to the investor side, is still impenetrable. It's still very much about relationships. And so at the moment, you know, as Tom said, we've only got about 30 who've raised money. So it's like, if you want to get introduced to most investors by someone that's likely to be in your network, you better know one of those Black founders that have raised some money. But on I guess more positive note, there are more communities like YSYS, for example, Founderfine, Color in Tech, you know, on this conference, for example. So I think those networks have become more accessible. But I think looking back, and I think probably the thing that would have made the biggest difference is if Black people who want to be founders go and work for early stage startups, go and work for startups that are, you know, led by Black founders, because, you know, we need really smart people. And also, you know, from a cultural perspective, there'll be a lot more, you know, there'll be a lot more things in common. So I think it's improving, but I still think there's a long way to go, and it is still hard. You know, can't even like, it's still tough.
Yeah, I really appreciate the thoughts and the honesty there. And I'm conscious we don't have a huge amount of time. I've got 5 or 6 questions that I'd love to ask, which you won't have time to. But I'm also conscious in the audience there may be, or there probably are, a lot of people who are thinking about starting their own business. I mean, obviously, I'm evangelical about it. It was the most important thing I've ever done. It changed my life on so many different dimensions. This is the world that we live in, and we believe it can be a huge positive force for good in the world and for society. And I just think, you know, maybe if I could start with you, Tom. So, you know, if you're giving advice, you know, to those out there who are thinking of starting now, obviously a Black founder community, what would be the 2 or 3 key things that you would say to inspire, encourage, or guide to make sure we have more awesome talent coming into this ecosystem?
I think network is so key. So I think you've got to think really hard about the sorts of people you want involved, or the skill gaps and knowledge gaps that you might have in what you're trying to create, and how you could potentially help fill that with really interesting people. When I go to networking events, I have like one rule, which is that I'm allowed to leave when I have 2 interesting conversations. And it doesn't matter who those conversations are with. You know, it could be, one of the conversations could be with a member of the bar staff, but the fact is that they have to be interesting ones where I've enjoyed the conversation, because people remember interesting people, and interesting people are interesting, and they'll remember you. And then when something comes up, they will put 2 and 2 together, and they will connect you later down the track. And that has always paid dividends for me, because networking is hard, it's difficult, it's uncomfortable, but if you stick to a couple of key rules, they can be so important. And I think it is networking that, and those sort of like contacts that are in the edge of your network, which jump you into whole new stratas. Like I remember going to an event, and it was a year later that person had talked to somebody else, who talked to somebody else, who then talked to me, which gave me my first customer. Like I never got that customer direct, but it was from a year-long connection that I'd made at a random event, and that continued. And I think it's that thing of like, a bit like the Gary Player quote of like, you know, the harder you practice, the luckier you get. You have to basically work hard to put yourselves in the position to get lucky, right? So you have to basically get out there. You have to network into your customer base and into those places where you want to be. I think often too many entrepreneurs spend too much time networking at a lower level amongst people who are the same as them, to sort of give them confidence, rather than I need to be in that higher next group. How do I get there? How do I position myself up there? And then, as Rich said, that whole thing of like, if you're not ready, or you think you might not be ready, go and work for another startup and learn all your mistakes on somebody else's money first.
Fantastic. Rich, anything else you'd add? I mean, I think, yeah, definitely getting experience, exposure to some great startups is a good place. Any other closing?
Yeah, I mean, one massive hack that I think has helped me is just be helpful to people. So like one main example, like I remember like coming across Monzo, like literally like back in the day, like say like 2014, 2015. So when I joined McKinsey, I literally emailed Tom and I was like, hey, we've got some super smart people here. Can I send them your way? And he emailed back saying, yeah, sure, please do. And I think I sent him probably about 6 early candidates from McKinsey to Monzo. I literally connected them to him. And, 4 years later, he was one of my recommendations to get into YC. And it's like, I didn't expect anything back from him at the time. I was just like, this is a super smart person. How can I be helpful? And I think, especially, most people here are probably in their corporate jobs. There's probably a lot of information that you have. Some of it you can share, where you can actually really help. You could definitely help an entrepreneur. And especially if, they're in a similar sector or something, just saying, hey, I read this and I thought it could be relevant for you is like so helpful. Or maybe sending candidates our way is like incredibly helpful. And I think it's a really powerful way to kind of pay it forward, because, the world is small and chances are like at some point your paths will cross naturally, or you may need a favor yourself. And I think that's a really great way to like build some of those networks and relationships that Tom spoke about in quite an authentic way.
Fantastic. I'm conscious we're up on time. There's a few questions that have been coming in. Apologies, I don't think we'll have time to answer, but please do ping any of us directly on social media, or otherwise if you want to ask those questions. There is one question, Tom, if you can answer. I think people are very keen to get their hands on the report or the data you suggested. A question around when will that be coming out? So if you could maybe just say that, and then we'll...
Yeah, so I think it'll be coming out in a few weeks. So the research organization is extend.vc, and we aim to basically put that out there for everybody to be able to take advantage of and learn from. So.
Brilliant. Well, thank you both very much, Tom, Rich. A pleasure as always. Some fascinating insights there. We could have spoken for much longer. And I guess just leave on the closing thought of, if you're thinking about it, don't wait too long. Get out there, start building, get to know people who are building, start working with companies who are building. We're hugely optimistic about the next 10, 20 years here in the UK. So let's get going.
Reach out to people. You'll always be surprised. People are there to be flattered. So write to people and say something nice, and they will more often than not they will reply.
Brilliant.